Hello and welcome to yet another episode of How to Learn Excel through a live project. So far, we created our bank account details, the payment modes, as well as the expense head through which we'll be doing our expenses. So, in today's episode, we'll start working on creating the expense tracker, that is a key Excel sheet in which we'll be entering your daily expense details according to your expense head and the payment mode through which you made the expenses. During this time, we'll learn more about implementing custom validations. So, we touched upon the validations, but there are a lot more we can do with the validation, like providing a custom error message, custom input message, and many things. In addition to that, we also will be learning about how to work with dates. Date is a separate subject in which we need to learn many things about how dates are being used in Excel, and also there are multiple functions available in Excel to work with dates. To cover everything related to the dates and all the functions which we can use in the dates, we'll have a separate video. But in today's episode, we'll be covering only those date functions which are required for our expense tracker. With that, let us go straight to our course and start creating our expense tracker workbook. This expense tracker workbook may take one or two episodes so that we can go step by step and create all the validations, rules, calculations, formulas, etc. in a slower pace. Let us jump directly. Let us start with our expense tracking application. Let us open it. We are at where we have done as of the previous episode. So we have our bank account available, we have our payment mode available, and we also have created the expense head. One thing you have noticed is I have converted everything which I have written in my Indian rupee to a dollar value so that it is more realistic. Now, let us create a new sheet and name it as expense tracker and start working on creating our expense tracker. Let me start with, as usual, a serial number, and we also need to know on which date that expense has been made. So I'm making a date, and then we are always going to spend the money against an expense head. That is what we have created here. So let us create expense head. And once the expense head is entered, we also need to know through which payment mode we have created the expense. So let me create something called payment mode, and we need to enter what is the amount we have spent. Okay. So let us restrict ourselves to this and let us proceed one by one to implement the other features. So first, let us format this table. So I'm not making it as a format as table now. So let us create a simple table. Let us create a proper border and make it as bold and give some color. So let's do with this blue. So the first thing what we are going to do is a serial number. So it is a serial number. We are not going to do any validation or anything. The next thing we are going to enter is the date. So let me tell you a small shortcut to enter the current date, because most of the time we'll be entering the records for the current date. Sometimes we may miss entering the current date's entry. So we may be entering it on the previous day or the next day. So the shortcut for entering the current date is to keep your control pressed and press the colon or semicolon button which is available in your keyboard. It will automatically enter your date. Now the next thing what I want is the expense head, which I want to restrict within this expense head table. So how I am going to implement? That is where we are going to first implement the data validation. Let us go step by step into it. My first objective is that I want to restrict the date. So the expense tracker I am going to do for this financial year, I don't want any date to be entered which is not belonging to this financial year or this calendar year. You can define whether you want to restrict it within the calendar year or the financial year. That is your choice. Let's see how to do the restriction on the date. So let me delete this. And on the date, I will go to the data validation and select a date. So the date, as soon as I say it has multiple validation, whether you can restrict it between two dates or not between 2 days or equal to many things you can do. The restriction which I am going to do is between. So I am going to say it should be between 01 January 2024 to 31st December 2024, and I say OK. Now, if I'm entering a date which is not belonging to this range, assume I'm doing it for 01 January 2023, it will not allow, it will provide you an error. Similarly, if I'm putting it above this 01 February 2025, then also it won't allow. But if I'm entering the current date or any date within this financial year, it will allow. Okay, now let us learn about few more tricks on the data validation. What I want is in the data validation, before I'm entering this date, assume like it is going to be used by more than one person, I want to give an input message stating that please enter a date within this calendar year. Okay, so I will give a title called please note and say that date should be current year. I say OK. Now, if I go to this, it will give you a small instruction to me which says that the date should be within the current year. What else I can do with this? I'm going back to the data validation and I can give an error message also. I can either stop, I can give a warning, or I can give a information. So let us see one by one. If I say I want only an information, okay, date range error. Let me type it this way and select it here. And if I say, if I change the date to 23, so it will give an information which says that date range is not within the current year, whether it is okay, cancel, or help. So it will accept because it is only an information. So it will accept the date range. But if I don't want the date range to be accepted, if it is not within that range, I can make it as a stop and I can give the same error message. Now, if I'm typing as 23, then it won't allow. So it will ask me to retry or cancel or help. So I can retry. I have to change it to 2024. Then it will accept. So now you have covered how you can implement a restriction on a date and how to give a instruction message as well as how you can control the error message. If you notice, the date I have entered is in the DDMMYYYY format. That is, the first is the date, the second is a month, and the third is the year. For an international audience, it may be confusing. So, for example, the Indians may be using date first, and the Americans may be using the month first. So, let us make it as a standard. So, I want to show it as the date plus three-digit month name, that is Jan, Feb, March, etc., and the year. So, how do I change it? So, I have a small shortcut for doing it. If I press Control, Shift, and hash, then automatically it will become this format. Now I have entered the restriction in the first row. So if I go to the next row and enter some date, which is not within that range, what will happen? Assume like I'm typing 4th, 14th February 1987. It accepts. So how do you implement the same restriction to all the rows? So you can do this way by just copy it and paste up to where you want the restriction to be implemented. Right click and you can select paste special and you copy only the validation. And if you press, now in every cell you will have the same restriction. Now if I type here 14th February 1987, so it will have the restriction implemented. So in Excel, you need to use this particular methodology of paste special, only the formats or only the validation or the formulas in multiple places. Next, let us see how we will control our expense head entry through a list which you already defined in our expense head. So for that, again, we are going to use data validation, but with a slightly different an approach. So I'm keeping my cursor in the expense head, and then again I'm going to the data validation, and this time I'm going to make it from a list. So then if you look at the list, there are some few options like ignore blank. That is like it will validate except if your data is blank. And you can also define as whether it is an in-cell drop down or whether it will accept it as a not as a drop down, but you enter something and then it is validating it. So it's always better to keep it as in-cell validation. So in this, we are also going to learn how to use a data range which is in a different sheet. Now let me select the source which we have already defined as expense head as the data for providing the validation. So I'm clicking here and keeping the cursor here. Let me just move it here. Keeping the cursor here, I will go to the next table, that is the expense head. As soon as I select the expense head, if you notice, the name of that sheet is already coming. And then I select from here, keep my shift button pressed and select up to here. And if you see that, it gives an absolute reference of starting from $B, $2, that is column B, row 2, to column B, $23, which is up to where I have the data. So now if I press click, automatically one combo box kind of a button is coming. And if I select here, it lists down all the data which is available in our expense set. It starts from home EMI and it ends up to entertainment expenses. And if I go here, it starts from home EMI and it goes up to my entertainment expenses. You can select anything from here, or else if you are just typing something like EN, so it automatically gives an autocomplete feature and you can select whatever data you want. Similar to how you have copied the validation which we have defined in this particular cell in the date column and pasted to all the other rows, you can do same way. Right click, copy, and select up to where you want to copy it, and right click and paste special and go to validation and click. So now if you go everywhere, your data validation based on a list is already available. So we will stop today here and we'll proceed further with all other implementation in our next episode. Thank you once again for watching our video, and I hope this is very helpful for you all. Once again, we request you all to provide your support by subscribing to this channel and liking this channel, and above all, giving your feedback as comments. Thank you. Bye bye.